Good evening. Welcome to MetroFocus. I'm Jack Ford. President Trump has just unveiled his long-awaited plan for overhauling the nation's crumbling infrastructure, declaring that, quote, it is time to give Americans the working infrastructure they deserve. The proposal calls for, among other things, spending $200 billion in federal money over the next decade to spur an additional $1.3 trillion in spending from cities, states, and private companies on major projects, essentially reversing the current formula of having the federal government pay the lion's share of an infrastructure project, with local governments kicking in smaller matching contributions. But will state and local governments be able to do more than they're doing now? Long Island Congressman, former vice chairman of the House Infrastructure and Transportation Committee, Lee Zeldin, says that nowhere is this issue more important than on Long Island, where repairing aging bridges, roads, water systems, and public transit is essential for his local economy, and we are very pleased that Representative Zeldin joins us now. Thank you so much for spending some time with us. We appreciate it. Let me start, because there's so much I do want to talk to you about: infrastructure and taxes and gang violence. But I think we need to start off addressing the terrible tragedy of the shooting in Parkland, Florida. Congressman, I want you to just listen with me for a moment. Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy took to the Senate floor yesterday to talk about this, and just listen to a small part of what he said, if you would.
This happens nowhere else other than the United States of America. This epidemic of mass slaughter, this scourge of school shooting after school shooting. It only happens here not because of coincidence, not because of bad luck, but as a consequence of our inaction.
I'm sure you share the sense of dismay and terrible, deep loss and tragedy that the senator mentioned. But can I ask you, do you also share the sense that Congress has to assume some responsibility for the shootings? And the number is up to 18 already in the first month and a half of this calendar year. Do you share that sense that Congress needs to be doing something and has not?
I don't believe that this shooter should have had that firearm to be able to commit this awful tragedy that ended up taking the lives of 17 men and women. That there were all sorts of signs that this was a very troubled individual, and he clearly stated that this was his intent. It was known. It should have been dealt with. He should not have had the ability to carry out the attack that he did. Now, all across our entire country, you have different laws, different rules that are set by state governments, by local municipalities, as it relates to guns. And it's going to be important for all states to be looking at what happened in Florida. I think it's important for Congress to look at what happened in Florida. Because all of the signs were there that this was a deeply troubled individual that absolutely should not have had access to a firearm.
Could you envision then a Congress taking a look at an amalgam of scenarios here that would deal with gun safety, right? Not talking about gun control, we're talking about gun safety. Also talking about making sure that the social media outlets have responsibility here for sharing this information with law enforcement when it does show up. And in addition to that, the notion of making sure that we are only allowing people who truly have the capacity for gun ownership, who are not so terribly troubled. Could you see a scenario where you would have all of those issues being addressed by Congress?
I think both inside of Congress and inside of state capitals all across our entire nation, there needs to be a conversation of how we can do better. When it's use of YouTube or Facebook or other social media platforms, where the social media platform itself is getting clear-cut evidence that an individual is expressing an absolute desire and commitment to carrying this out, the social media platform itself is in a unique position to be able to assist law enforcement in identifying these individuals. And for law enforcement to be working closely with those social media platforms, because in the Army we call it a force multiplier. It helps both do their job. It helps the social media platform do what it needs to do to succeed. It helps law enforcement do what they need to do to succeed in working together. So from an oversight standpoint and leadership, in being able to bring, whether it's local law enforcement in your home state, working together with a social media platform that might be global, or it's oversight and other abilities that might exist, whether it's in Congress, the administration, and elsewhere. That's important too, because in a case like this, all the evidence was there to identify that you had a deeply troubled individual absolutely intent in carrying out this attack. It should have been known, and it could have been prevented.
Well, hopefully as Congress moves forward on this, we'll be able to spend some more time with you and talking about it. Let me turn the page, if I could, to some of the other significant issues here. And let's talk about the infrastructure and the infrastructure proposals. What was your first reaction to these proposals and how you think they could work, especially for the New York area that you represent?
It's a starting point to a conversation that needs to take place in Congress between Republicans and Democrats, conservatives and liberals, engaged with the White House. The Congress passed and President Obama signed into law at the end of 2015 a 5-year funded highway bill. This is a conversation about what to do on top of what was passed just over 2 years ago. And I welcome that discussion and being creative in how to both best leverage federal tax dollars, to be able to leverage private capital, whether it be the releasing of lands, the use of private activity bonds, public-private partnerships where they have worked in other parts of the country. You have state and local governments that need to do certain work to their own state and local infrastructure assets, where they can get assistance with the federal government to be able to complete a project that otherwise they were a little short on. That's all important. And we all obviously need to approach this conversation with open eyes that, we could say that we need $6 trillion to pay for everything we need to pay for. It doesn't mean that there's just $6 trillion laying around. And that really relates to not just infrastructure, but many different needs in this country. So we also need to have an honest conversation with each other about how, whatever that final number is of federal tax dollars, how we're going to pay for it.
One of the criticisms of this proposal has been focusing on the notion of getting private enterprise involved here. And you have been very supportive of your region in terms of your opposition to the tax bill, your opposition to the budget, and how you think it would impact the pockets, if you will, of your constituents. But if you look at the criticism, one of the things people say is, well, if you bring private investment in, they're coming in to make money, which means if you have private investors who are going to build a bridge, they're going to expect to make money, and the way they do that is through tolls. Some people would suggest that that just means that, for instance, your region, your district, your constituents might be paying more out of their pockets then to allow this to happen than if we followed what had been the traditional scheme of the federal government picking up the tab for most of it. What do you think about that?
A few thoughts come to mind. One, the Department of Veterans Affairs at Northport Hospital on Long Island is a sprawled out campus that includes buildings that some are operating at 15% capacity. There are conversations going on right now where the Department of Veterans Affairs is looking at releasing some of those lands to condense the footprint of the medical center operations itself and to be able to engage in public-private partnerships. Another example is that you have different trades unions, for example, that have their pension funds, and they invest their pension funds in projects that are done elsewhere, nowhere near a geographical area to be able to benefit their own membership. So where we should be smarter with is, one example I'd use is the operating engineers. For the operating engineers to be able to invest their own pensions, the reinvestment going into projects that will end up paying for and providing jobs to operating engineers, that makes sense. The third thing that comes to mind, and just for sake of time, I'll keep it to 3. Governor Cuomo was looking at a conversation that's really been around for a project idea that's been around for decades, the idea of connecting Long Island to Connecticut with a bridge or with a tunnel. And I'll tell you, just to be honest in answering your question, if there was a bridge or a tunnel that was built between Long Island and Connecticut, I would expect there to be a toll for use of that bridge in order to help pay for it. I don't see another way for that to be financed.
Let me switch again to another topic here, and that is of gang violence. And as you know, it's been the focus of a lot of concern and media attention, especially recently, and significantly on Long Island with the MS-13 gang. Now, I know that you recently met at the White House to talk about this, and you were behind some legislation that hopefully will have some impact on fighting gang violence. Tell us about the meeting at the White House, and tell us about the proposed legislation.
There are a few aspects of this effort. One is for all levels of government, law enforcement especially, be able to work together. When the Eastern District of New York U.S. Attorney announces indictments on 12.5 or so alleged MS-13 gang members, that is a product of working with Suffolk County Police, of working with the Suffolk County District Attorney. It's a result of all levels working together. So that needs to be encouraged and always be working on improving. Secondly, the federal government provides funding that gets used. It's not a lot of funding. In Suffolk County, I'm thinking of one grant, for example, where I've seen how $500,000, which, by the way, obviously, as you and I both know, is not a lot of money, but watching how far the $500,000 has gotten stretched really proves the efficiency of how important this money is in combating gang violence. There's also a connection to other issues, because while we might read about the murder with a machete of MS-13 members against 4 young men, we might not hear about the human trafficking, the sex trafficking, the drug trafficking, those other elements that might not be high profile. So combating all of that is important as well. Right. And the other thing that I'll point out is, as we're having this immigration debate, a lot of the individuals involved in these gangs came here through the unaccompanied minor program. Some came through TPS. As we talk about the future of immigration policies in this country, there's certainly a correlation that has existed with some of the policies. That's how many of these, especially MS-13 members, have gotten here. So that's part of the debate too, the legislative component. Right.
Well, as we know, nothing is simple, especially trying to deal with these types of issues. Representative Lee Zeldin, we appreciate you spending a lot of time with us today. Our hopes are, as these issues move forward, we can get you back in to join us to continue this conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. You be well.
Thank you.